Our first presenter today is somebody who is a new friend of the Spur Leadership Tribe, but somebody who I think has a unique story to tell. Jenna Lee grew up in the San Francisco area. She was an anchor for Fox News before leaving that and moving here to Central Texas, where she has started her own company delivering news from a nonpartisan perspective. I think we should all give that a round of applause. That's a huge opportunity. Jenna's new business is called Smart Her News, and she delivers the news every single day in bite-sized, digestible bits, starting with Smarter News Coffee Talk every day on social media. And so I'm excited to share with you her story as she comes to the stage. I want to ask you if you will join me in welcoming to the Spur Leadership stage, Jenna Lee.
Thank you so much. I got to hire him. He is good, right? Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's really a privilege to be here with you. Mac is right about not everything, but so many things, right? Yes. So my name is Jenna. I am a journalist. I'm also the founder of Smarter News. I am a wife, a mother of two. In fact, my little girl is celebrating her 3rd birthday today. And just in case anyone's wondering, yes, we're expecting a 3rd baby. I don't want you wondering. You never can assume these things. You have to confirm the facts. So yes, we are going to be welcoming a 3rd baby in the summer. And you know, I was thinking about this when Mac first invited me to come speak today. I didn't expect to be pregnant speaking. And I was a little bit concerned about that, just how it kind of fits in initially. It wasn't the picture that I had imagined. And I started thinking a little bit about that, and I thought, well, motherhood is the ultimate leadership role. Yes, parenthood, fatherhood. You just often don't see anyone following you. So you don't necessarily feel like a leader, but you are. And so I think it's important when we talk about leadership to talk about it in its totality, not just in a corporate atmosphere or in a community atmosphere, but also how it affects really every facet of our lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But also when Mac first invited me, I wasn't sure he had the right person in my household. You see, my husband actually wrote the book on leadership. He literally wrote the book on leadership. We overuse that term literally, but Leif actually wrote 2 best-selling books on leadership. And I thought, maybe they have the wrong person, you know? I mean, how many leaders can you have in one household? But I realized, even though I live with a leadership instructor, someone that does this professionally, a former Navy SEAL that's written a best-selling leadership book, I still was embracing a lot of the stereotypes about leadership that really weren't accurate. You know, you tend to think about a leader as someone that has a lot of people behind them, and those people are solving the problems. But a leader, in and of themselves, is a problem solver. I mean, that is who they're supposed to be. And that's where I see myself fitting into this leadership conversation. You know, George Washington didn't just say, hey, you guys got it, like you're good, I'm going to be over here. He was thinking about ways to constantly solve problems. And I think that's a unique way to look at leadership. In general, that's what I've done over the last 2 years, is I've thought about a problem and tried to develop a solution. And that's a unique perspective I hope to bring you today. A lot of people like talking about what's going on in the press. They like talking about discontent with the American media. What I want to offer you today is an inside perspective from someone who is on the front lines of news delivery for the last decade, and talk a little bit about the problems that I saw there and why I made the decision to move into a more leadership role to try to solve some of those problems. And that's really what's happened over the last year. One of the things I want you to think about and walk away from this conversation with is that this whole idea of not liking American news or liking the news media isn't new. You know, this is a storm that really I saw brewing years ago. It has just made landfall. It just feels very relevant right now, but it is just the beginning. And when this storm kind of comes through, the entire American media landscape will be completely disrupted and I think destroyed, hopefully to recreate itself in a way that better serves the American consumer. Because at the end of the day, the stories that we tell each other create the world that we live in. Whether it's your personal story, the story of your community, or the story of your country. It's important to have a responsibility and work ethic when you think about the way that you're not only telling your own story, but the story that really unites us as a country. And so I believe in journalism. I believe in freedom of the press. I believe opinion journalism is an excuse for a lack of discipline. It's not. Opinion journalism is not journalism. We've kind of gone into this, but that's not journalism. I believe if you focus on an underserved consumer, you can actually help solve the problem for everybody. And that's what I'm trying to do with Smarter News. And we're just a year, we've just launched a year. So today I'm gonna talk to you about the problem, I'm gonna talk to you about the solution. But one of the things I talk about with Smarter News is quantity is the enemy of clarity. And that's something we have a lot of in the news, right? In our own lives. Quantity is the enemy of clarity. So I feel like I could sum up the last 2 years in a few easy photos. So let me show you the before photo if we could. We'll put it up on screen. Yes, here I am. As a national news anchor at Fox News, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, co-anchored my own show. I look at that person, I think, wow, she looks relaxed. Hair and makeup, you got the great lighting. This was arguably, to some, the pinnacle of a career. To be a national news anchor in the middle of the day, delivering news to millions of people, was what I had worked so hard to do for more than a decade. And I was able to achieve my dream. So that's the before. Let me show you the after, because I think it's really, there. This is the choice that I made. I walked away from my career and chose entrepreneurship, and I love this photo. I know it's not a professional photo, you guys. I know it's a little crazy, but this is one of the most accurate photos I feel I've taken over the last couple of years. The empty wine glass, I think, is important. I think the expression. My husband walked into the kitchen this night. He's like, I got to take a photo of this. The website that I'd worked hard to develop an event wasn't functioning. In fact, what it was doing was erasing data. So as we were creating content, it was just erasing it, just whenever it wanted. And so this really kind of symbolizes an important part in time. Let me just show the other photo, because this is also a new photo with my new life. These are my little kids. As I mentioned, my little girl turns 3 today, and my son is 4. And we were having construction done in the house, so we were wearing our ear protection in the house. But this is often what my life looks like now. And what unites these two photos, and thank you very much, we could take the photos down. What unites these two photos is I love being a journalist. I mean, that's all I ever wanted to be. And you can be a journalist in a lot of different ways, and I've certainly experienced that. But I like to think that journalism is in my blood. My grandfather was a war correspondent for the Associated Press during World War II. He was embedded overseas. He returned to San Francisco and helped the Associated Press really establish their bureau there. And when I think about my grandfather, I have such a distinct image of him. He would come into his living room. He had a big leather chair. And he would come into the living room and he'd shuffle. And he always had his slacks on with suspenders and a white shirt and a fedora inside. And he had these big glasses. One side would be taped with electric tape, the black tape, to create a patch, because he went blind, and he was legally blind, and that's why he had to stop working as a journalist. And he would come in and sit on his chair, have a pipe, and next to him had these stacks of National Geographics and newspapers. And he had a magnifying glass, and he would use his glasses and this huge magnifying glass to keep reading, because he loved the news so much, you know? And it was a little scary to me as a child. He was intimidating. And I didn't really understand why he did this. Now I do, because I have stacks of magazines around my own house, because I love information as much as anybody else. And I never was able to talk to my grandfather. He really passed far before I knew I was going to be a journalist. So we never had that conversation, but I think it's ironic, maybe more than a little ironic, that I ended up in the same career field as him. But through many twists and turns, I tried to deny the dream of becoming a journalist. I always wanted to be a writer. I thought I would never be able to do that and make a living. So I made a couple different decisions after college, but always worked at a district newspaper in San Francisco, writing for free, reporting for free, getting clips together, and eventually those clips helped me get to graduate school in New York City, where I stayed for the next 13 years unexpectedly. And through, again, a series of twists and turns, Fox News, which was it's hard to imagine it at this time, but Fox News had just come up as a competitor to CNN, and they were launching a business network, and they needed new faces, they needed new people. And I had worked in many different places. I had been rejected from almost everywhere, and I thought, well, I'm gonna apply. I wanted to go into broadcast journalism because it scared me, and I thought, well, if it scared me this much, then maybe I should try it. And I was just at the end of thinking, I'm gonna just have to leave New York. This isn't gonna happen for me. I'm gonna have to think about something else. When I was able to go and do an interview at Fox Business and was hired there as one of their first reporters, and by the time the network launched, I was named their 5 a.m. anchor, one of their 5 a.m. anchors on the network. And this was a dream come true. Not only was I doing what I thought I should be doing, reporting the news, I had a great role. Sure, I went into work at 2 o'clock in the morning. That wasn't as glamorous as it sounds. But it was this remarkable opportunity to provide news, to provide a real service. And I thought that's exactly what we were doing. Something happened in that time period that was crucial. The financial crisis hit. And suddenly, this small network that no one was really watching became really important to the broader Fox News channel. It's hard to remember those times about how scary the financial crisis was, but it enabled me an opportunity to cover a really important story, get a lot of experience, and shortly after starting at the Fox Business Network, I crossed over to the Fox News channel, where I stayed in the same role for 7 years. At that time, I was, if not I was one of the youngest national news anchors in the nation, and I loved my job. I mean, I couldn't believe that I was a working journalist. I was getting paid to be a journalist. Everyone tells you when you go to journalism school, you're never gonna get paid. You're never gonna be able to actually work as a journalist. It's interesting, it's like the number one thing they tell you, which is not necessarily inspirational, but it actually does happen sometimes. And I just thought, this is an amazing experience, how unique and how lucky I am. What a privilege this is to deliver the news. At that time, it was very specific at Fox News. There was the news side and there was the editorial side. The editorial side clearly happened in the evening. It was like your opinion pages in your newspaper. The day side was going to deliver the news. The importance was fair and balanced. You're going to have strong opinions on both sides. You're going to represent both sides well, and you're going to do something unique in the media environment because at that time, some would argue, there wasn't strong conservative voices. So hey, we're going to balance things out. Strong conservative voices, strong liberal voices. We're going to deliver news in a good way, and it worked. Fox News was very, very successful. But something happened, and I can't tell you what exactly it was. This one moment when everything changed. But there was a noticeable change a couple years into my position where suddenly the conversation was more about red meat. We got to give our viewers red meat. So think about red meat. I mean, I'm thinking about throwing a piece of red meat to a lion in a cage. What happens when you see the lions get fed at the zoo, right? They tear at the red meat. They're excited. They battle each other. It gets them all going. And that was what the directive was. Find divisive issues, put it in front of people, let emotional debates happen on television, and that's going to bring us viewers. Again, I don't know why the decision was made for that, but we're going to start doing more of that. That's what our viewers really want. And I didn't really love this idea because it wasn't necessarily delivering information, and it wasn't necessarily satisfactory to a viewer. At the end of a segment, a debate segment, what's the takeaway? Why does it matter? And it's hard to fact check people's opinions. So while it's great to have debate, If you're a journalist and you want to deliver solid information, it presents another challenge. So it wasn't something I love to do. It's not something I necessarily was asked to do a lot because I would ask a lot of questions, quite frankly, about some of the segments. But it wasn't just Fox. It was across all these different networks, cable networks and also major news networks at the same time. If you look at the rise of panel shows, how many panel shows do you see? This really goes back to this point in time where there was this switch. And what was most alarming to me was that's not what our consumer was telling us. Social media was really hitting its stride. We had a great connection with our consumer through social media. We had a great connection with our consumers if we were walking down the street. The single question I got as a news anchor during this time was, where do you go to get the news? And that's a stunning question because people felt that they weren't getting the news. So I wasn't just nervous about this business decision, I was afraid. This is showing a real difference between what our consumers want. They're telling us, I got to turn you guys off. There's too much yelling. What's anyone even talking about? And what our executives thought was the right business strategy. And that sort of divergence didn't seem good. It didn't seem good. So while that was happening, something really important happened in my personal life. I became a mom for the first time, and it was sort of thrust into this world that I didn't know anything about. And although I would say across the board, it's not gender specific, the discontent with the media, I did find, speaking to more moms and more women, that they in particularly felt very disconnected. And it was partly just because of the level they were multitasking at. The way a woman is living her life now has changed so much in the last 20 and 30 years. But the way we deliver news to her really hasn't changed that much. We're still kind of in the same sort of format. And I thought, well, this is terrible. I'm talking to a lot of women. Some of them are full-time moms. Sometimes they're working as well, and they're sort of telling me the same thing. They're feeling like a failure for not being able to keep up with the news. But in reality, the news is really failing to deliver to them because they're the consumer. And so I feel like I might be uniquely positioned to help solve this problem and bridge that gap. I'm not sure how, but I've noticed that. There's something going on here. And what's even more ironic is whenever it's an election time, or whenever you talk to businesses, what is the one group that everybody wants to talk to or talk about? It's the independent woman that no one talks about other than when they actually need her vote or they need her money. So I thought this is a consumer that's important. She's not being prioritized. Maybe we should think about how to do that. So I returned to Fox. I tried to pitch a couple different, what I thought would be digital platforms that would be able to help with this particular problem. I didn't really get anywhere. And I ended up leaving to have my second child, Liberty. And that's really important. I haven't talked too much about this publicly, but something happened. So something's going on in the news. I'm feeling this discontent. I'm sensing there's a problem with the viewership. There's something going on I can't quite put my finger on. I'm having a second child, so there's a lot going on in my personal life as well. But on this day, I'm looking at the clock. Liberty was born about 3 hours from now. So it's almost to this date 3 years ago. Something happened when she was born that was completely unexpected. I had a medical emergency, something that just sort of happens. She was born into this world healthy and wonderful. I was healthy, everything was great, until everything wasn't great. And I stopped counting when the number of nurses that came into the room hit 15. I was like, this is not good. And it was unexpected. It wasn't, it was one of those things. How did this happen? Everything was fine. And I can still sort of picture her being wheeled out, my daughter being wheeled out of the room, and they're wheeling me into emergency surgery. And I kid you not, you have these moments, and you hear people talk about them, and then you think, well, I don't know if that's really the case. Until something like this happens to you, and I was being wheeled in, and I thought, what am I doing here? That's what I thought. What am I doing here? And it was that kind of quiet calm that comes over you when you know everything's out of your control. And I actually said to myself, what am I doing at Fox? I had that thought, and it's not like I was watching TV, guys. I was in the middle of delivering a baby. But this sort of, it was this question of like, what am I doing here? And that sort of started a series of events. While on maternity leave, Fox News starts to go through a huge sexual harassment scandal that starts dismantling the network. Later, now we know it as the Me Too movement. Donald Trump becomes the presidential nominee for the Republican Party. By the time I get back to work, we're in full election mode. We go through the election. President Trump is now President Trump. And the media in general is just going through a big disruptive period. For me, I was in a really crucial time. I had to make a decision about whether or not I was going to sign up for another 3 years of work, and that's the way our contract periods worked. You had 2 to 3 years of a secure job, which doesn't exist really anywhere, but certainly doesn't exist in journalism. And I was trying very, very hard to talk to my leaders. But you have to understand, we were in an environment where every other week a different leader was having to leave, or was fired, or was resigning, so it was chaos. So I'm about 60 days away from having to sign a contract or not. You have a job or not have a job. And I can't talk to anyone. I don't really know what to do. I'm interviewing across different networks at this point. And my husband says to me, I have an idea. You know what we should do? We should go to South Africa. And I said to him, that is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. What are you talking about? Turns out he had an opportunity to work in South Africa. And he said, you should come with me. And I sort of had this premonition, if I could get outside of everything that was familiar, maybe I would have some sort of, epiphany that would help guide my next steps. So even though I had a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, I got on a plane to a different continent, and we were in South Africa for a little while, and it seemed like, this seems like a pretty good trip, but there's one thing you can do in South Africa that you can't do many other places in the world, and that is go cage diving with great white sharks. Thank you. Did you do it? Oh, yes. So you're totally going to understand. What's the number one reason that you go cage diving with great white sharks? So you can stand in front of people and talk about it, right? Because there's no other real reason. You realize when you're doing it, there's really no other reason. Let's just refresh our memory what great white sharks look like. Can we put up a picture? There. Okay? That's how you're going to feel today after the Spur Leadership Conference, by the way. Feeling good like that. But, that is the image of a great white shark. We've all seen the National Geographics, right? It's amazing. You're getting into these caves. Okay, that's not how it really is. Like, you're getting on an old fishing boat with a lot of people that you don't know that didn't take motion sickness medicine, that are throwing up over the side of the boat, and you're just hoping to see a shark. Like, it may or may not happen. You're wearing, like, ratty wetsuits. I mean, it was really this moment that I thought, what are we doing, So we get into the cage. Thank you for taking that down. It says a different tone when it's behind me on a regular basis. We're in this cage, and this is where an actual epiphany did happen. So it is one of the most miraculous experiences, I have to say. It is magnificent. These are huge predatory fish. They move through the water like fish. It's not like Jaws. They're not coming up to the boat that way. They're magical. I mean, it is amazing. But when you're in the cage looking at them at sea level, you do think that. And you also think, well, they're really not interested in me, so that's a little comforting. And then your other thought is, if they want to get into the cage, they're totally getting into the cage, right? This whole idea that I'm secure in this cage is false. And there's an interesting anecdote with that we can take further. What we perceive as security often is us just being stuck, right? And sometimes it feels good not to be able to move that much because it does feel comfortable. It's familiar. You don't have a bunch of options. But when you really step away, you're very vulnerable when you can't move. You always have to be the predator. You don't want to be the prey. Who had the better deal, the shark or me? I don't want to be swimming free with the sharks. But I started to think about that with my own life. Was I secure in the job that I was in? Or was I stuck in a familiar role that wasn't allowing me to grow? And therefore, was I vulnerable? And when I got back to New York, I started to look at my next steps in that way. Was I going to be able to grow? Was I going to be able to develop new skills? How was I going to be able to change as a journalist so I could create value, not only to the company, but to my consumer? And if I could not position myself that way, was I leaving myself vulnerable? Ultimately, that and a series of other variables led me to walk away from Fox News completely. I interviewed, as I mentioned, across every network. I've met with executives from ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them. And one thing I think it's important to know, because there's so much attention on cable news, they're all the same. Media has a very particular point of view. They're living in the same cities. They're going to the same parties. They're talking to the same people. The same sort of bewilderment about how President Trump could ever be elected was in every single conversation. The question about really moving to digital was something that people thought, well, yeah, we need to do, but well, we don't really need to do it that quickly. Our numbers are still pretty good. And I just felt alarmed. I felt like if my job as a journalist is to create value, again, to the consumer and to provide a real customer service, how can I do that? So I decided to walk away from everything, not only Fox, but we left New York. We moved to a little town outside of Austin, the town of Driftwood, population 600. Thank you very much. Yes, it was a big change from America's largest city to stomping on scorpions for the first time. Haven't done that before, so I learned a lot. But I really started to think about going to work. How can I apply the skills that I have and lead into a solution in journalism? And that's how I came to Smarter News. I thought, well, what do people really need from the news? What do you want to feel? Do you want to feel aggravated by the news, or do you want to feel smarter? And I thought, well, people want to feel smarter. Smarter sounds a lot like smart her. Well, let me go back to that woman, the woman that I know that is multitasking, that doesn't have a lot of time to watch Good Morning America or the evening news, and when she has 5 minutes, doesn't know where to go because she doesn't know who to trust for nonpartisan information. Let me think about her first. Let me prioritize her first. I don't want to develop a website just for women, but let me just think about her. Sort of like, you open the door for a woman, she walks through first, but the door remains open for everybody else. Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to think about everything that I've learned and burn down the corporate structure and think about how do I apply that to create a real solution. And that's how I came to Smarter News, a digital platform. You're going to get great information between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. I'm going to take everything that I learned in mainstream news and think about formatting it to the opposite. So instead of thinking about how many things I can put in front of a consumer, so I can attach pop-up ads where they can't actually read. You guys have experienced this. You just want to read an article, you can't even read it because you got these pop-up ads coming at your face. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to have no ads. Let me just see if I do that. What happens if I have no ads and actually think about their experience? So quick, concise, nonpartisan information delivered any way that they see fit, whether it's on the web or through social media. Find the highways that they're driving on and just sort of meet them where they are. I'm not requiring them to sit down and watch anything, listen to anything. I just want to be a customer service for them, because that is ultimately what a news service is actually delivering information to your very important consumer. And so that's how Smarter News launched. It launched just simply as a digital news platform. I encourage you to check it out. You can see it on your phones. You can see it on your social media. Play with it. We developed these interactive cards. Social media really is developed all around different cards, these square cards, whether it's on Instagram or otherwise. I really want to be able to interact with these cards. So these cards we can interact with. You can play videos off of them. And I'm just constantly always thinking about how do we go back to the consumer and actually make them feel good about the news. You don't have to deliver good news to people. We're all living lives that have a lot of ups and downs. You can handle a lot. It's about just making you feel good about being informed. And the end effect of this has been really great. I've listened a lot to our followers over the last year. They wanted more videos. So in the morning, you have to be creative about how you solve the problems. They were saying, let's have a podcast, let's have a newscast. And I'm thinking, there's no way I can do this. I'm a single person trying to, change the world with my single platform. It's never going to work. And then I realized, well, there is a time that I can deliver news to people off the cuff, off the top of my head. And that's around 7 o'clock in the morning when I'm getting my kids breakfast, because I know we're in one spot. And so that's how Coffee Talk started. So for about 10 minutes, I talk to the camera, deliver you the news, quick and concise, and often don't have any hair, makeup, toothbrush, nothing. It's actually the complete and total opposite to what everything that I ever did, right? So instead of having the glossy image of the news anchor that's delivering you this perfect news, this is the opposite of that. But it's actually about the news, and I like that symbolism, kind of stripping away all the different production elements and just being able to give you what you need, which is just a couple headlines, maybe 3 headlines, and why they matter. And that's it. Because that's something, that why it matters part is often missing from a lot of the news coverage. So that's something that we really focus on there. So it's been an interesting adventure. I've gotten a lot of great feedback. What's been really remarkable is I thought this audience of women specifically, but everyone kind of feeling about the news, I thought there was a big audience there, but I didn't know quite how big it is. People are a lot more independent thinking than we know, or we perceive them to be, at least in the big corporate environments in the media. And the feedback has been great. Women have told me that they haven't watched the news in 2 to 3 years, but now they're watching it. They feel informed. They're telling their friends about it, and it's really been just a remarkable and very rewarding experience. We just finished our first year, so I have a long way to go. There's a lot of leadership problems to solve, and I would say really, I think about a few different takeaways about what did I learn as far as the leadership lessons learned that I think can be applied really to anyone. And I'm taking a step back on that. I think the first one is this. You always return to the core of your mission in your life, whether it's in motherhood or professionally. I wanted to be a journalist. That was my goal, was to be a journalist. My goal wasn't necessarily to be a television host. And eventually, when those two things intersected in a way that wasn't positive, I had to make a really difficult decision. I don't regret the time I spent on television. I loved it. I thought it was great. I still enjoy being on television, but it wasn't what got me up in the morning. What got me up in the morning was the news, was being able to deliver it. And so I think that's a really important takeaway. You kind of return back to what was your purpose originally. You always got to re-identify with that, because when you get further away from it, suddenly you're down a different path that you never intended. And here I thought I was living my dream as a journalist, and I was in some respects, but there was a lot of ways that I could have fed the other parts that I would have felt I was delivering more to the purpose in life, which was more about delivering the news, less about being on television. So that's number one. The second thing is you have to love the people you serve, and it doesn't matter what sort of an industry you're in. Most industries are customer service. They're driven by the people. They're not really driven by this amazing product if no one uses it. And you don't have to like the consumer all the time, but you have to love them enough to respect them. You can't just be throwing red meat to them and saying, oh yeah, they'll be fine, they'll get it. This will be great for them. You can't do that. You can't talk about them one way in public and talk about them differently in private. You can't do it. It's not going to work for you. I think ultimately that's one of the biggest problems with media still today. In fact, a Fox executive just gave an interview recently over the last week, and she was talking about creating value for shareholders and really running a successful business. But what about getting to know the consumer? There's still a misprioritization. And until that rights itself, the discontent with the media is not going to go away. And that's why through this disruption, I hope there's more creative sources for you to actually gather information. The last thing, and I'll end with this, it comes back to motherhood. You cannot be a martyr to your mission. That photo that I showed you is funny because, it's, again, going back to the empty wine glass, that period in time when, I'm working late at night, that's still my reality. I'm still working way too late at night, and as probably most of you are, because I'm dedicated to the mission. And I haven't solved this problem yet, but I think it's important to recognize that if you become a martyr to your mission, you're not helping anybody. You're not helping the people that you're serving, and you're not helping your family, and you're not creating the environment that will actually help you get to the next step, because it's unsustainable otherwise. And so, again, I don't have the answer for that, but maybe in a couple of years, I'll figure it out. My goal now is to spend just as much time dreaming about the life that I want to have outside of work as I do in work, because having more exposure outside with real people living real lives will help me serve them better in my business role. And it's very difficult to find that balance. I wish I could tell you, here's the 80-20 rule. Here's the 60-40, here's how you're going to do it. I don't really know how to do it. But I think recognizing that has been a very difficult learning process for me because I only know one speed. And you have to be able to adjust. So as I just kind of conclude here, news is personal. Your story is personal. The story about your company, about your goals and your dreams, all of this is really personal. This is why we have to care about the news. We have to tell it responsibly. We're telling a story not only of a community, but of a nation. And if we start too far down the road of not doing that in a responsible fashion, we're hurting ourselves on so many different levels. So it's important to remember how do we actually achieve responsible storytelling in a way that helps the community, doesn't hurt them. And I hope that's one of the solutions I'm presenting through Smarter News. So thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the revelations that come when we talk. I appreciate it very much.
Wow. Well, we're gonna do a little conversation, a little Q&A here for a second. Jenna, that was incredible.
Thank you.
That was great. I know this is going to sound silly. I was watching backstage, and I was sitting there and I go, man, she's a great communicator. It's kind of what she does. But anyway, I'm really insightful. You may want to write that down. Jenna Lee is a great communicator. Jenna, that was incredible. I loved your story about your grandfather. Like, I could smell his pipe smoke when you were telling that story. He wore a fedora inside.
Inside. I mean,
that is great.
I just do it outside. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, he was a really interesting guy. I wish I have all of his old clips. I have some letters that he wrote my grandmother. He did some amazing things, like he witnessed the first nuclear bomb test, and was writing to my grandmother from the ship of being able to see that. But he wasn't well, so I never was able to really talk to him about it, and he was very gruff. So I could see why he was probably a great journalist, because you probably wouldn't mess with him, and I certainly didn't want to as a child.
He was kind of like the great white shark.
He was
not in the
That's
cage.
interesting. I didn't think about that connection, but yes.
That's hilarious.
He was intimidating.
One of the things that I have loved since I found out about Smart Her News, this is so funny because, I think it's funny, but when I saw Smart Her News, I was like, I'm a guy. I don't know if I can watch this. I felt like I was almost like walking into the women's room. You know what I'm saying? But that may be too much information. But it is so well done, and it's such to me, I watch it pretty much every morning. Maybe not live, but I watch it at some point during the day, and I'm thinking, it's such a breath of fresh air. And I love what you do when you explain the stories to keep an eye on through the day. You usually have a big three. But you also explain why this is important. And for me, it's such a I went through this. I had a purge the other day. I purged so many Twitter follows that I had that I started realizing they were just bringing me down. Mm-hmm. They were just like, boo. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about how you, as you digest and process the news and the stories, how do you stay neutral in telling those stories?
That's actually a good. Thank you for that. It's something I missed in the talk. Being nonpartisan just takes discipline, and if it's something that you practice, it just becomes habit. This whole idea that you cannot be nonpartisan is false. That's an excuse. It's an excuse to be the opposite and be like, well, we don't really know the facts, so we'll just give you a couple opinions, and then you figure it out. No, there actually are some facts. And I think one of the things, yeah, I know, sounds shocking.
Imagine that.
Right, there actually are. And there are a couple things that you can, those are your guideposts. That's what you need. And one of the great things about working as a journalist at this point, a better part of 15 years, both through local news, digital platforms like Forbes, and then through Fox, is it becomes accumulative. So then you're able to tie together stories. And that's where professional journalism actually does matter. I know a lot of, there's a question, well, who's really a journalist these days? Anyone can be a journalist. I do believe, there's a lot of perspectives that people can share. But there is something to being a journalist and practicing those skills. Journalists don't have a license to practice. They have their integrity, and that's it. And that's something they have to practice on a regular basis. And so if you just, that's the habit forming. And listen, when you get out of line, your viewers tell you. I mean, there's times even just by semantics, a word choice, you can really change what you're trying to deliver. And it's important to be sensitive about that too. And so again, that takes just a little bit of discipline, a little bit of practice, but it's not magic.
Right.
You know,
right.
With the right guide, anyone can do that.
You have to want to.
You have to be committed to it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you talked about at the very beginning of your talk that I think translates to everything that we do in the room, whatever it may be, even as a mom or a dad or a CEO or a pastor or whatever you do, you made the point that it's all about solving problems. So what is the contribution that you're making? And I think that's one of the things that gets lost when we think about our careers in terms of how much money can I make, where do I have to live, all those kind of things, as opposed to, like, what's my calling? What is something I can actually contribute and make a difference doing?
And that's exactly the issue that I was confronted with, which is, hey, I had this amazing opportunity to learn all these great new skills. So how am I actually going to channel them in a way that's productive? If what I'm doing now is counterproductive or viewed that way, then I can't stay there. I have to figure out a way to make it productive for people. We're clear about a need that exists. So how do I fill that need? And, you know, it would be great. Listen, the goal for Smarter News is big. Smarter News is just the beginning of a platform. Smarter News will become Smarter Texas and Smarter Austin. I think there's a lot of power in local information. It'll also go through multi-channels, so Smarter News becomes Smarter Health and Smarter Beauty. It can go international. There's nothing keeping it from Smarter Italy or Smarter Rome. But also, importantly, it doesn't keep, because of the branding being what it is, one of the things that news can't do is it can't deliver you products. You know, you're not going to buy an NBC sunscreen, for example. I mean, Lord knows no one would buy any sunscreens from the different networks now, but you might consider a smarter sunscreen or a smarter gloss or smart, you know, so the branding is very purposeful to try to fit a need in all of our lives, which again is the overwhelming amount of content. Technology is amazing because it's given us access to so much information. It's part of the reason why I don't believe in subscription fees, which I'll probably have to reevaluate, but it's because the information is out there. The question is, how do you take the information and make it valuable to someone so that they actually feel more in control of the content versus just overwhelmed by it? And that ultimately is what the problem that Smarter News is trying to solve.
Which I think raises another question on the flip side of that same coin. You can't do what you do just for the money.
Right.
But at the same time, most of us have to make some money. I mean, you have to eat, you have to live, you have to pay, you know, those kind of good things. Talk a little bit about how you approach, and this may be the wrong term, but if it is, correct me, but how you approach monetizing Smarter News. Because it's one thing for you to provide it and do coffee talk in the morning, you know, and have Trace and Liberty there with you, helping out.
Yeah, helping.
But at the same time, for this to continue to be self-sustaining, it has to be able to make money.
Right. So the model that I see, again, I don't see the advertising model working well for the media. Everyone's bought into it. You know, the Washington Post, the more articles they put out, the more advertisements they can attach, the better for them. Their ad dollars go up. Not necessarily the greatest for you, because sometimes you can't get to the Washington Post because of their subscription fee, or you have to go around the different pop-up ads that you're never going to buy from. Has anyone ever bought from a pop-up ad? Ever? I mean, I'm just wondering when the advertisers realize that that's not the way to go. I think the way to go is, I think the way to return media to something that's more valuable is to kind of go back to the model of radio in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, where you have continuous content. You're seeing this a lot with podcasts. You know, you have continuous content, there's a pause, there's a testimonial about a product, there's a deal for the consumer in that potentially call now, you get 10% off. And I think that's the way, through affiliate partnerships, to actually partnering with brands. They're not advertisers that just kind of come and go. So the first year of Smarter News was about developing an audience when people told me that will never work. Every single executive I sat down with across networks told me that if I want to feature in news, I better get a point of view. And I just thought that was wrong. That's part of the reason why I didn't fit in there. I just didn't feel, that's never was my calling. So I couldn't even fake that if I wanted to. It would not go well. And so I believe there was an audience. We proved that there is an audience. It's a growing audience. It's women between the ages of 25 and 55 around the country.
And
There's
some men in
also
their 50s.
Quite a few men as well. But and that the importance to me isn't as much the numbers as much they feel connected to the brand. And so then we've done our first brand partnership where we've actually run a campaign where we not only talk about a product that we love, but we tell the story about why that product matters. So if you're a viewer, let's say you're not in the market for what we were selling. I was partnering with an American company that makes bed sheets and towels. Not something you buy very often, but they're a great American company with a phenomenal story. So my thought was, I can create value with my consumer through telling them a cool story that they're going to like anyways. And you know what? If they're in the market, they're going to buy the product. Turns out it was fabulously successful in this week campaign and gave us a really good template for future partners that we believe in their products. Right. We're not just putting garbage in front of the viewers. We believe in their product. They have a great story. We're going to help them achieve both of those things.
So what you're doing business-wise, if I'm hearing you right, it's not transactional. Right. Per se. It's relational with the consumer and with the partners that you partner with. Because one of the things that I noticed about 3 or 4 years ago, because I used to be a political news junkie. Like I'd wake up in the morning and I'd watch Morning Joe, Fox and Friends, and Mike and Mike on ESPN. And I just rotate between the three of them. But what I noticed was that the political shows, but they started getting more and more partisan, more and more point of view, if you will. But then I thought about it for a second. They're first and foremost a business before they're news organizations now. Like you were talking about, it's not, we're going to present the news, here's what's happened, here's why it's important. It's, how can we get more eyeballs to get more advertising dollars?
And it's a problem in the way that they perceive the audience. I mean, the fact that the term flyover country was used all the time, when you really step up in the lead up to the campaign of 2016, it continues to be used. I mean, think about that for a second. That is crazy. Flyover country is actually America. You know, it's not just this foreign place.
It's so condescending.
Well, and it is. And the reason why I feel it's condescending is because it actually is condescending. And I don't put myself out there to be hypercritical of my former employer or really any of the news networks. I think there's some value that a lot of these networks still create through some of the journalism that they do. But in general, I think the way that they're looking at their audience is not one of respect. Right. And that leads you to a lot of different business decisions because it is a quantity game. And listen, I understand that. I mean, would I love 1 million followers for Smarter News? Yes, of course I would. But I don't want 1 million followers just for the sake of it. At the end of the day, that's not going to create value for my partners, my brand partners, because they're not going to feel connected to the brand to actually buy the products. And that number in and of itself isn't necessarily proving value. It just appears like value.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's so fascinating. And I think you just said something that triggered something in my mind. I think it's so important that you do a great job of, and this is part of why we invited you to speak today, because you are clearly reacting against what you had seen happening in that industry, but you're not bitter about it.
Right.
And I think that's really important when you, well, at least publicly you're not. But I think that's really important. When you're trying to provide a solution, it's easy to throw rocks at the problem instead of just being the solution. You know what I'm saying? And so I think you do a really, really great job of that. And I hate to tell you this, but you started preaching at the end.
Oh, did I? Really?
In a great way.
Okay.
When you said you cannot be a martyr to your mission, would somebody? That was incredible.
What? See, that shows my lack of knowledge on. But I'm glad it's true. Well, it's true, and actually, it's interesting, you know, speaking about faith, I know that's not the focus necessarily of today, but it has been something that I've struggled with over the years because I felt so connected in so many ways through my work of actually serving a purpose that I felt I was guided to, you know, and especially with the news, when certain things happen and you're on the news, you can't help but think for example, during the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, there was a moment during that day, I happened to be scheduled a lot on that day just because it was a Friday and it was, they needed some extra people to fill in. But at the end of the day, I thought, no, I was supposed to be there because I knew I could handle a horrible story like that in a way that hopefully was responsible. I don't trust myself on everything. That's something I do trust myself on. And so I do feel, guided. But I found out really, this has been a very challenging time to walk away from the news and sort of feel like you walked off the end of the earth. And the only thing that people want to talk to you about initially is sexual harassment and not what you've done with your career. Even when Fox announced my leaving, the only thing they said about me in a press release was Jenna was a news anchor and she's the mother of 2 children. And that's it. I worked for them for 10 years. I did a lot of things. I interviewed a lot of interesting people, and that was hard. And it wasn't bad terms. They were confused about why I was leaving, and but not, I still, I don't have bad feelings. However, I've had to confront a lot of different emotions. And we were talking about this. There was a time I brought my kids to church. My husband travels a lot. I'm in this new town. I don't know anyone. I'm struggling with a new business. And I brought my kids to a local church, in part just because I needed a little bit of a break, because they have childcare for an hour.
We get that.
Yeah. I mean, let's be real. I was like, I like to listen about the Bible, but I also need like a second. So, but I also knew I was really actually committed to going to church because I knew I needed something. I was not right. I was not right. And I was really confused about a lot of things. Still am at times, of course. And so I'm sitting in church, and it wasn't the center part of the sermon, but it was the part of the sermon, and I'm sure you could quote it better, that talks about vengeance. And vengeance is not yours, right? It's the Lord's. And at that moment, I was like, it gave me a little bit of peace, because nothing in Smarter News is about retaliation, right? Or anger. And if it came across that way, it would damage the brand. And if I'm thinking about the consumer, I can tell the story without talking about that. That doesn't mean someday I won't talk about the different mixed emotions that led to the decision or being here. But I had to figure out a way to not be so angry. And that was one of the ways.
Yeah, I've never struggled with that personally, but I'll pray for you. It's amazing to me how much of your story, like as a pastor, which is fairly removed from network news, but it translates across. Again, I think because no matter what you do, it's people, The delivery of news was the easiest part of your day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For me to get ready to preach, that's easy. I have to grind at it, but compared to the other stuff, but it's that other stuff that's also the rewarding part.
Right.
And when you're building something like you are, I think you have to be chasing something. You have to be moving towards something and not moving away from something else, or like you said, retaliating.
Well, you can't define yourself by negatives, right?
Yes,
and that's something,
that's
even in the
better said.
news stories. Well, even in news stories, you could see it today, even in the presidential election cycle that we're moving towards. I think something to really pay attention to is it's much harder to state what you're for than it is what you're against. It's one of the problems that the Democrats are going to have to confront. They can say, well, we're not President Trump, but they really have to define, well, who are they? What do they look like? And what do they look like in 2020? Republicans have to do the same thing as they think about what the next several years look like. That's what the entire campaign was about, really leading up into 2016, is this question of identity. Who are we? What do we stand for as a country? What does that look like? Because it's harder. That's harder to say. And I found with Smarter News, definitely there's times where I can say, well, I'm not doing these things, but I have to remember, well, what am I doing?
Right.
What am I actually accomplishing? And focusing on that, because you can't just say, well, I'm not Fox.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't work. That's a limitation.
And I think to me the most powerful thing that you said, I loved you can't be a martyr to your mission, and that probably will become a sermon before too long. But I think the most powerful thing that you said is something that resonates no matter what you do. If you're a parent, a pastor, an attorney or an anchor person, whatever, you have to love the people you serve. And you have to care about them. One of the things that we've found out with our kids through a lot of trial and more error was, as a parent, you can't try to parent so that your kids will like you. That's a recipe for disaster. But your kids have to know that you like them. Like you have to be for the people that you lead. And so whether you're a parent, a stay-at-home mom or dad or whatever, you have to care about it. And I think that's really at the core of what Spur Leadership is all about. But I think you said it so well.
Well, and I think the important part of the Martyr to the Mission is that if I was here's an example of it is, I was worried about being able to, I'm always worried about, every week I'm wondering if I can actually get through it. I mean, let's just be clear about where I'm at right now. I'm like, it's true, because I'm wondering, how can I get the content up? How can I get it fact-checked? What exactly are we doing? I wanted to develop some video content and audio content, but in the course of my day with 2 young kids, if I actually want to be a part of their life, I can't, how do I do that? And when I actually, what's the word? I don't want to say sacrifice, but when I gave in to the fact that I actually couldn't do it all, the product that came out of that is the one thing that helped us grow, which was, if I can stand in my kitchen and be okay on camera with no makeup, drinking coffee with my kids and talking to people, they loved, that's what the viewers wanted. And if I had been pushing against and restricting, it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be good enough, it's not going to be clear enough. It's all of those things. It's actually not perfect, and that's what people like about it. And so, that's something you constantly have to work with, because again, it's going back to what the people want. If that's what they want, then that's what I'm going to do.
Well, and I think too that you can always take a perceived problem and, well, maybe not always, because sometimes problems are just problems, but a lot of times a perceived problem can be leveraged into an advantage. Yeah. And you've got that, in spades.
For now. I think, and that's the other thing, is you have to know that's going to change.
Yeah, but just wait. When your kids, all of your kids, start school, it's going to be
game over. I mean, that's what I'm really going to get
game starting.
Right. Game over for them. The game started for me. And that's what I think about. I'm like, if I can just keep going the next couple years, if I can continue developing the audio, if I can just keep going
hang
the next
on.
few hours, I'll be fine. No, but it is. You just think this is going to change. It's going to change over the next 6 months. I'm thinking about, well, what can I do to serve people when I have a newborn? How does that look different? And being open and honest and having that conversation with the consumer, I think, only endears them to the brands. Instead of making them feel like, there's so many perfect people all over the world on Instagram and everywhere. You see them all the time.
Sure.
And I do think there's going to be a little bit of I think we've gone so far in that direction. I sort of feel like, I don't know, talking to your consumer, providing customer service, being a real person actually will be valuable.
What a novel approach. It's incredible. I don't know. Absolutely. Thank you. Y'all don't know this, but not only is Jenna pregnant, she's sick as a dog. So will you please join me in thanking Jenna Lee for being here today? Thank you so much, Jenna.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.